I'm Helen Lee. I am a maker educator and creative technologist, and I'm going to be sharing with you some of my favorite tips for teaching tech in the classroom. So I'm going to start off with my favorite way of teaching tech, and that is physical computing. Now, physical computing is not what you normally think of when you think of teaching technology, you know, typing away, making websites, etc., etc. It's actually making technology that is affected by the real world. It's tangible. So you're thinking about sensors, you're thinking about robots, you're thinking about bleepy bloopy noises, and you're thinking about LEDs. I find that it's a really, really effective way of getting the whole classroom excited by things. You know, it's not just code on a screen, it's something that they can actually see having an effect in real life. It's tangible, it's, in my mind, kind of more creative, and yeah, I just really love teaching with physical computing rather than straight coding in my classroom. So my favorite type of controllers to teach with when I'm talking about under 18-year-olds is it's a range of beginner microcontrollers called the BBC MicroBit. It's a cheap, sturdy little thing. It doesn't really do that much, but it does enough to be able to do everything you need at the beginning. So you've got a few sensors on there. You've got an accelerometer, so it can tell where it is in space, or you can tell if it's shaking it. It's got LEDs, so little tiny lights that light up and flash. It's got the ability to put headphones on it, so you can make bleepy bloopy chiptune music. You know, you've got buttons on there. You've got a compass on there. So even though it's got some limited sensors, it's, you know, it's €10. Come on, you know, very cheap, very affordable for a classroom. And it's just very versatile. I think also having a limited range of things on your first microcontroller is not the worst idea, because you're not dealing with 500 different combinations of things. You're dealing with a limited number of inputs and outputs. And you can do amazingly creative things with those. As well as the BBC MicroBit, there are other beginner electronic boards. For example, this one. This is the Circuit Playground Express. That's made by Adafruit in America. And also there's a German one called the Calliope. And they do kind of the same things. They've all got onboard sensors. Some will have different ones. And they've all got these kind of connectors. So if you want to add in extra blinky lights, or if you want to add in different sensors, you can use crocodile clips to attach them, which is a bit more user-friendly than wiring things up the normal way. Another reason why I really love those beginner microcontrollers is that they will all be codable using block code. Now, block code is not like text-based code where you're writing out the syntax and writing the words yourself. It's more like a visual style of coding. So you're dragging blocks into each other, which are a lot simpler. And actually, I even use those to teach at a graduate level when I'm teaching artists and designers how to use technology in their work. And yeah, okay, they're adults, but I still want to be able to get them excited and creative with technology in a really short space of time. And using block code allows me to teach things that would be a lot more complicated in text, so concepts like Boolean logic, counting loops, that kind of thing. So they're not worrying about the syntax, they're just thinking about the concepts. So yeah, that works really nicely for me. But yeah, so check out MakeCode and the Circuit Playground Express, the Calliope, and the BBC MicroBit. All great platforms, all reasonably priced as well, and all have excellent support and great project ideas too. Another one that I really like is this. This is called the Makey Makey. I would highly recommend having one of these or a couple of these to play with. These are a bit more expensive. I think they're about $50 or maybe €50. But they are wonderful for creating kind of collective experiences. To see what I'm talking about, I would just recommend you go to YouTube and you search for Makey Makey music. And there's a lovely video there, just 5 minutes long, of some really great examples of things that people have created collaboratively. And it's a really great way of learning about materials and conductivity as well. So would recommend the Makey Makey. It's a really nice one. And if you feel like you've outgrown your beginner electronics, then I would recommend that you take a look at 3 families. There's the Arduino family, the Raspberry Pi family, and then there's the Adafruit family. If you buy microcontrollers or sensors recommended by any of those, then you're going to have a good time. I'd say when you're starting out, don't buy random boards off of the internet, especially if they don't have good documentation. You know, you're not really buying the hardware. or you shouldn't be buying the hardware, you should be buying the documentation. And Arduino have excellent documentation, Raspberry Pi have excellent documentation, and the Adafruit Learn site is spot on. Would really recommend you take a look at that. So yeah, I mean, the Arduino and the Raspberry Pi and the Adafruit boards, you're going to have a good time with any of those. They're a bit more advanced than your beginners, but you're still going to have plenty of support there. So if you've got more advanced students or you feel like you're ready to take the next step, I'd recommend having a look at any of those three. Okay, so those are the microcontrollers, very brief introduction to microcontrollers. The other thing which is really fun to look at is craft-based technologies, and this is great for younger kids. You are going to be looking at things like paper circuitry, and that's stuff like moving origami. And the way you do that is you create electronic circuits using very cheap materials. You can, using a piece of paper and some copper tape. Copper tape is very, very cheaply available. In hardware stores, you can buy it for €1 a roll. It's called slug tape. Slugs hate it, so they sell it in gardening shops. And it's very, very cheap, really effective, and kids go bonkers for it. You know, it may seem simple just using one 3-volt battery to light up an LED, but honestly, like, it really makes people very, very excited, and it's a wonderful lesson. You can also get, instead of copper tape, you can also get this stuff. This is slightly more expensive, but it's called Maker Tape, and it's sold by Brown Dog Electronics. I think somewhere else sells it, but yeah, Brown Dog Electronics. And it's just a bit sturdier, but copper tape works the same. You know, it's just conductive path, essentially. If you are interested in DIY and that kind of paper-based stuff, I'd also recommend you check out a company called Chibitronics. Chibitronics have created these lovely circuit stickers. They're a bit pricey, but they are really nice, and they've got wonderful teaching resources as well. And they're run by a really, really nice woman from MIT who's created some really cute videos as well. So if you do have a little bit of budget, I would recommend checking out Chibitronics. Oh yes, so the other thing I want to talk about was within paper-based craft electronics was cardboard prototyping. So cardboard is a wonderful material. It's very, very cheap. And you can do all sorts of really interesting engineering things with it that you can then add in physical computing to make it animated. But yeah, cardboard prototyping is a wonderful thing to do in a classroom, very empowering for the children as well. You can also make basic robotics. So basic robotics, it's actually really easy to do. Robotics sounds really complicated, but really all it means is you make something move around. You can do something as simple as brush bots and art bots. Now, brush bots are essentially putting a vibration motor on the back of a brush, typically a toothbrush or some kind of small scrubbing brush, and then making it move around. It's great for science lessons because you can alter the path by creating different shapes on top of the brush bot. It's great for prototyping. It's also really, really good for art. You can create like generative art things. Art bots, if you Google art bots or scribble bots, you'll be able to find really good instructions for that, as well as brush bots. Again, there's a company called Brown Dog who do brush bot kits, which for me, I think they're the cheapest way I've found of doing a classroom full. They use like little toothbrush heads and googly eyes. Who doesn't love googly eyes? To make really lovely little things, and they're just not expensive, and they're mostly reusable as well. So check that. I mean, you can do your own, of course, as well, but for me, I just find it more convenient. Oh, yeah, obviously. All of these things, the craft-based things, are actually in my book, The Crafty Kid's Guide to DIY Electronics. So I've got plenty of good projects that you can do for very cheap in there. But you can also find really good instructions for any of the things that I'm talking about on Instructables.com. Great website for maker education stuff, and just for general kind of craft-based stuff, actually. So just get yourself on Instructables and Google away, and you can find something really good. Another resource that I find invaluable is Twitter. weirdly. So there's a lot of makers on Twitter and a lot of educators on Twitter, and building up a small community on there, you can find some incredible people and incredible resources. There's lots of stuff out there. There's some really good books. There's a range of books by a woman called Kathy Ceceri, who does a lot of really good craft-based electronics as well, so I'd recommend you check out her work. Oh yes, I also wanted to talk about Sewable electronics and wearables. Now, a lot of electronic stuff do cater quite strongly towards the boys in the class, but I find that craft-based electronics, in particular the sewing, is the opposite. Although depending on the country, some boys may dislike the idea of using a needle and thread. They might think it's girly. I mean, that varies on country to country. I think in the UK, not so much. You are taught sewing. But in Germany, I find that people are a lot more kind of strict on the gender divide, in my experience anyway. And again, in China, everybody sews. Like, the sewing skills in the schools I visited in China were very, very good. But in America, nobody knew how to thread a needle. It's kind of really interesting, very cultural. But yeah, so wearables are it's an amazing, exciting industry. So you can find lots of good inspiration from big projects, but also by putting sewing into an electronics class, you're putting it into a stereotypically feminine space, which can make girls feel a bit more comfortable about it. But again, it depends on your classroom and depends on the individual children in your class. The other thing I wanted to talk about was straight coding. So that's physical computing and also craft-based electronics. Hopefully those tips were interesting. But also, if you want to do just straight coding, there are 4 things that I wanted to recommend to you. Firstly, the first one I've actually mentioned already. It's makecode.com, or .org, I think. And Scratch. So those are both block-based coding. And I mentioned them earlier in the context of physical computing, but you can also use them in plain, just ordinary coding, so coding for web. One of the things I have the most success with is with plain coding, no physical computing, is games. So games and music. I think those are the 2 things that all children, largely, like most children, will get really engaged by. So there's some recommendations there. There's Make Code Arcade, wonderful block-based arcade game creator. I've had some wonderful lessons there where I've given them the basics. I've taught them for half an hour, and then 2.5 hours later, I've basically just sat down and had a cup of tea, apart from some occasional guidance. But they just get it, and they're just so interested in creating their own games, and they get really into it. They design the game layout, they design the behavior of the sprites, they're using complicated, it's just really good. You can just let them go at it. So yeah, use Scratch and use Make Code Arcade. There's also a wonderful website called Erase All Kittens, which is a super cute web coding kind of gamified platform that I'd really recommend you check out. I've had some nice experiences with that. And yeah, the final thing I wanted to recommend is a wonderful platform called Sonic Pi. It's Sonic Pi Pi. Like the Raspberry Pi. But that's developed by a guy called Sam Aaron, and it's a way of teaching coding using by making music. And it's one of those experiences where you just set the kids off and they just go at it. You could leave them there the whole half a day, and they probably wouldn't even want to speak to you because they're so busy coding their own beats. It's kind of dance music. It comes from the movement of algo rave, where people live code music, so it's kind of a little bit edgy, a little bit grimy. But it's also teaching you great skills, and there's an inbuilt tutorial that takes you through some of the basic concepts of computing in a really easy to understand fashion. And because you can hear the changes in the code, you kind of more intrinsically, you just understand what's happening. You understand what a loop is, and you understand, how to alter things. It's a good one. So yeah, arcade games, Erase All Kittens, Sonic Pi, and block-based coding. those are my favorite ways of teaching basic coding. So I hope that those coding tips, those tips for your classroom were helpful to you. I have a lot of fun with everything that I've mentioned today. I think it's just really important to have a nice time and find the thing that works for your students. Yeah, I hope that was good for you. Bye.